Well, welcome everybody. We are streaming on Microsoft Teams, but we're also on LinkedIn Live for this Leaders Converse event brought by the Executive MBA program at the Lubar School of Business at UWM. Today, we've got a great topic of optimizing your sales pipeline during COVID, which, of course, is in my opinion, I tell everybody that sales is everybody's job in a business, but there are a few people who are a little bit deeper in the trenches, and we've brought a lot of those with us, and we've got some people from California, we've got some from Pennsylvania, we've got some from the Midwest. I'd like to start off with talking about our moderator, Dave Wallace, the founder of Bay Ridge Consulting. So, Dave, if you'd like to say hello.
Hi, everybody.
We also have 5 panelists with us today. Brad Kyle, a EMBA grad from the Lubar School. Very proud of that. He's the manager of account delivery at Emerson. Brad?
How are we doing?
Good. Just making sure everybody's microphones are working here. So we also have Joe Ruff, the sales manager at Beckman Coulter Life Sciences.
Hey, good morning or afternoon, everyone.
And Doug Odell, another EMBA grad from the Lubar School of Business. He's the Vice President of Sales and Commercialization at Bemis Manufacturing.
Good morning, Mr. Wickersham.
Good morning, Doug. And we have Chris Lewicki, the OEM Account Manager at Rockwell Automation.
Good morning, everyone. Excited to be here.
As well, we have Bill Snow, Sales Coach at Sales Progression LLC.
How's everybody doing today? Welcome.
So glad that everybody could be with us. I'm watching 2 computers right now, one in front of me here, and then another one watching the live stream going on LinkedIn in case people have questions. So at this time, we're asking that participants, not the panelists and moderator, of course, turn off their video and microphones. If you guys have questions, you can put it in the chat window. Otherwise, when we get to the Q&A session, we'll have you turn on your video and microphone and you can ask the questions directly. But at this time, in order to kick things off, I want to turn it over to Dave Wallace, our moderator for today's presentation. So take it away, Dave.
Adam, thank you. And I'm going to ask everybody, whether you can see me or not, to grab a piece of paper and grab a pen. And I'm going to ask you to write down 3 numbers, one on top of the other. So the first number is 13. The next number is 2, and the last number is 160. Now, what do these mean, and what do they have to do with today? Well, only in 2013, so only 7 years ago, a taxi cab medallion in New York City was worth $1.3 million. Okay? 2 new players came to town. We're all familiar with them, Uber and Lyft, and they disrupted the market to such a degree that a taxi cab medallion today in New York City, or as of 2018, is only worth $160,000. So that means in 60 short months, that asset decreased in value by 10x. Now, fast forward to today, you're experiencing massive disruption from a new, we'll call it a player, if you will, but this time it's not over 60 months. It's 10 times faster. So today, this all-star panel is going to share some thoughts, some ideas, and some techniques that are going to help you to avoid what happened to the New York City taxi cabs, or if it's kind of sort of happened to you already, maybe how you can reverse that trend. So with that, I'm going to jump into the first question, and I guess I'm going to ask for if somebody wants to jump in and answer the question first, and then we'll allow and then other people, if you want to play off of that answer, go ahead. I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular, but I'm sure some of you might feel more comfortable answering this than the other one. And the first question is, if you're a mature company that has seen, kind of little or no drop in sales, what do you think about the long-term implications are going to be on your sales budgets and on your headcounts, since there's been a considerable drop in SG&A because of the restricted travel and the restricted entertainment? So I'm going to pause there and let somebody step in and start the process, and we'll go from there.
Sure, David. Brad Kyle here. First, great question. Looking forward to this panel, and also want to thank UWM for having me. Probably didn't get a lot of no's asking salespeople to talk about themselves and talk about their struggles. So happy to be here. I think everyone, especially in the B2B sector, really started the year with a packed pipeline. I mean, business outlooks were good. The economy seemed strong, and there was just a flurry of projects out there to go and, kill it and eat it like we do best. But, fast forward 6 months and we're sitting here in our makeshift offices or real offices and, trying to figure out, how do you keep the business going? But, more importantly, how do you keep customers engaged, especially on a business development end? I mean, between not being able to travel, plus the amount of just spam calls everyone is getting, which I think would be extremely hard if you're a cold caller, just not even getting people picking up the phone. And, everyone's sidelined. Companies that have like the core group of the road warriors that are out there, putting on trade shows, knocking down doors, and, a lot of entertaining too, that's just all ceased. And obviously that drop has helped companies weather this storm in the short term. But, my concern and also question to the rest of the panel is if these companies are modeling their next 3 to 5 years, with this reduced SG&A, and all of a sudden travel starts ramping back up, the trade shows start happening again, how do you balance that with, where that SG&A is budgeted? And, like two major concerns for companies, and also a word of caution is first, if they look at slashing trade shows, especially for, the medium, large players in the market, if, the trade shows, their ROI has been decreasing the last 10 to 20 years. Sure, they're outdated, but the negative effects that a company not showing up when their competitors are there definitely has, ramifications. Because if I was a competitor to that client, I would be targeting every single one of their customers and, planting that seed of uncertainty. And then two, when those expenses, those travel expenses start increasing, what's the easiest, or I shouldn't say easiest, but what's the fastest way to reduce SG&A? And that's cut heads. And all of a sudden your company is expecting growth, but you're looking around you and your sales force is slashed 25, 50, sometimes even more, from a percentage standpoint, and you just don't have the boots on the ground to go and generate the business. So I'm not sure if others have been seeing that, but that's a lot of the talk right now in our industry. And it's, how do you combat that? How do you get the coverage? How do you transform your sales team to sell remotely and, sell via Zoom and WebEx and all that fun stuff? And a lot of companies are unpacking that right now. Some are moving faster than others. Some have already been there. But, that's my biggest concern right now for like the longer term future of once this gets back to whatever normal that's going to be.
Thanks, Brad. Anybody else want to play off of what Brad shared?
Yeah, I can jump in on that, and I really like Brad's answer and the perspective that Brad you put out there regarding that. What happens if you slash all these budgets? So I'm going to look at this from a slightly different perspective, but I think it goes along with what you're saying. Rather than slashing budgets, especially companies that are larger, more established, that have the funds in place, they need to look at repurposing rather than slashing right now. So that way, when travel does pick up again, you're just moving it from buckets. And I'm going to provide some more context to this. In addition to being a boots on the ground salesperson, I'm also a podcaster in the manufacturing industry. I host a podcast called the Manufacturing Happy Hour. And I'm going to use this as an example where I think in this day and age, if salespeople are going to continue to pull in new leads, continue to nurture client relationships, they're going to need to take on some of the functions that used to be solely responsible or solely the responsibility of marketing. So you're going to start seeing some crossover and integration between sales and marketing. And that'll probably be a theme in a lot of the topics I bring up today. You know, you need to look at individual salespeople starting their own webinars, doing their own podcasts and video series, doing their own newsletters, things that often might have fell into a bulk marketing bucket at some point. Now individual salespeople have the opportunity to do that. And the reality is, to do some of these right, those require budgets. So that's my answer on the budget standpoint. Look at ways it can be repurposed rather than cut to still drive new growth and results. From a headcount standpoint, and I've been seeing this before COVID came up as well. You know, I was already starting to see a shift from geographic sales forces to more of an industry expertise that can be taken from different regions regardless of where you are. So in the case of myself, I work at Rockwell Automation. You wouldn't just have your automation specialist for the San Francisco Bay Area where I'm located. You could have an automation specialist for, let's say, all of the Western US that really, really, really knows the semiconductor industry as well. So you're taking that expertise that you used to just have in a product area and you're mixing it with expertise in industries more so than you did in the past. So I see a shift more so than a cut in the way things are done. So that's my thought around that one.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to follow that up with a question because I'm curious as to what you think about when you think about podcasting. Do you see yourself as actually having that as an expectation for your sales team going forward, that they're going to be expected to do those sorts of outreach things, and it might even be a condition of employment? I'm curious as your thoughts on that as well as others.
You know, never say never. I think it might be a little early before that becomes a requirement. I do think, I mean, there's gonna need to be some creativity or some marketing function integrated into a salesperson's responsibilities. I would say at the end of the day, it's still about driving sales. So you're gonna have to tie these activities back to new opportunities, back to revenue. But I could very well see something like saying, hey, you need to run a customer webinar series, or you need to do something that plays to your strengths, because sales is still a thing where there's not necessarily a single right way to do it. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. So I do think as we've been getting more creative during this time, you know, sales managers, sales directors, they will be able to find ways to work those type of activities in there. But I say that with the caution of making sure these activities are not just saying, because you wouldn't want it to be the same thing as go on 10 sales calls a week. You want it to be something that's related to revenue and related to growth.
Right. Great. Thanks. I appreciate that. Anybody else want to weigh in on either the broader question or what Chris just shared?
You know, I will, David. I think this is really going to be an exciting time because we have all been stuck in that's just the way it is. That's what we do. I think companies have been struggling with this. Let's all spend $1 million and put our big convention into Chicago or San Francisco's convention centers. Oh no, we can't pull away. We can't pull away, and their budgets are ridiculous. The ROI has been, plummeting for years. And so it's time to take a different approach. So I think it's refreshing, and I think obviously we're seeing that things are changing with a lot of the way that we conduct our lives now, and it's going to shift into how we approach sales too.
Great, thanks, Bill. Anybody else want to weigh in on this, or we can move on to another topic?
Yeah, maybe just another quick comment. I think to what Chris and Bill both said. You know, the tools like podcasts and, general social personas, it's more an augmentation of what we've already been doing for a long time of, scaling our skill sets at a broader capacity to reach a larger audience. So I've had the opportunity to connect with all the fellow panelists here, and it's, really interesting to see that we all kind of have a very active persona on something like LinkedIn. I think it's, like I said, it's kind of in a lot of sales scenarios. It's leaving no stone unturned to try and find new prospects, new opportunities, things of that nature. I think when you're looking at the in-person sale and perspective also, you can't totally lose that perspective. I mean, Brad mentioned the trade shows. I think there is a magic to, kind of showing up just because it's kind of the industry standard that you have to look at. But I think there's a lot of benefits to, still looking for in-person sales calls when that does become a reality. I mean, a lot of the opportunities to, certainly on video calls, you can gauge body language to an extent, but not really the same as you do in a formal in-person setting. The opportunities to prospect while you're on an in-person sales call, walk in the halls with, the customer or on your way out or in, I mean, you lose some of that capacity. So in terms of getting rid of headcount, certainly there's a dynamic of and balance of inside sales and things like that our company has looked at to kind of increase our efficacy. But the in-person, I think, is never going to truly go away, just because there are things that you really can't augment or get out of a video call or email or phone.
Good. Yeah, good point. There's, in-person sales are still going to be out. Chris, you want to jump in?
Nope, I'm good right now.
Okay.
I'll have some
All
more
right.
thoughts coming up soon.
Well, we may come back to that one in a minute. I want to move on to another question. I want to kind of get a little bit more sales specific and ask the group to talk about whether or not you've had to have a change in the qualification process you use when you're going about this new remote selling world. So anybody want to jump in on that one?
I'll take a stab at that. We're a B2B company, and on average, our sales process, pre-pandemic was somewhere around 18 to 24 months. And, like many people obviously on the call today, usually you measure your success of that in broken down milestones along the way. And, one of the things that we've seen, maybe an unintended benefit, or maybe an unanticipated benefit of COVID, is how that has completely taken that process and turned it inside out and kind of threw it out the window. We've done prospecting 100% virtual. We have secured engagements with new partners in as little as 30 days. That pre-pandemic would have taken that 18 to 24 months. And I think that's one thing all of us have gotten, I guess, a little comfortable with is the unknown and the uncomfortableness of this. So I mean, 100% we are certainly executing in a different environment. And back to the previous question, somebody said getting back to normal, and this sounds a little cliche, but what we talk about is we're really redefining normal. I think, COVID-19 is going to be a catalyst for a lot of different businesses to do things differently. And it's no different than sales organizations, how we go to market, how we message our products, how we create value in the marketplace. For the next 15 years, the inflection point is likely going to be 2020 and 2021.
Great point. Yeah, I think that we're all tired of the term the new normal, because we're living it, so it's where we are and we have to deal with it. Anybody else want to play off of what Doug said relative to qualification process?
Yeah, I can comment. So to me, I think the aspect of qualifying a customer remains, pretty simple in terms of, does the customer have a problem they're trying to solve? Do we have a product that potentially solves that problem? And does the customer have budget assigned to be able to purchase that type of product, or budgeting or something to that tune? So I think like those really generic, simple questions still are maintained when we're talking to a potential new client. I do think because the dynamic of companies is a lot different in the current, scenario with everything going on in terms of, when budget's available, how it's being spent, if people are being aggressive or being more passive in terms of what they're spending, that you do have to maybe investigate some of those things a little bit more, both on, the timing of when people are looking to make decisions and when they're expecting you to deliver on those types of solutions, and also just funding sources and things like that. But I do think the core of the qualification and the skill sets that, salespeople have in terms of their, first or second conversations with customers still are maintained even in a, virtual and digital environment.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
I'll throw one other more specific example in there in terms of lead qualification. And this goes back to the sales marketing integration theme. You know, we were participating in an industry specific trade show not too long ago. And in the past, when you'd be doing physical trade shows, you know, let's say a lot of the responsibility in the booth for lead collection would have been on someone in marketing or on a domain expert per se. But we've seen salespeople getting more involved in that initial lead qualification standpoint from a trade show, because virtual trade shows, while they're kind of a different beast, it's still the same rules that apply when you go into a trade show. You need to go in with a plan. You need to know what you want to get out of it and who you want to meet. And, you know, I haven't been to enough to say that this is the case across all of them, but it's pretty cool if you're attending one where you can search for exactly the type of role you're looking for, and it'll show you all 20 people that fit that VP of automation role or that director of marketing role, whatever it is. So we're seeing more salespeople get involved in that qualification process in the context of trade shows specifically, and that's resulting in some good leads that we're seeing in our regard. So it's looking for little specific opportunities like that where you can take that lead qualification process to the next level and maybe get better leads than you were getting in the past.
Cool. Anybody else? Because I've got a follow-up question for Chris, unless somebody else has some.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll throw something out there. I think not everybody's in the Rockwell, and this isn't Rockwell's in my hometown, right? So, but I'm sure there's people on the call that are small to medium-sized businesses, right? And so you have to change your approach on how you go qualifying, and you got to really dial into your niche and try to be the authority in your space, and make sure that you're personalizing your sequence, your messaging. Because if you think marketing's just going to bring you business, you're wrong. And one of the things that I stress with my customers is, we got to pick up the phone. We can't rely on marketing to send a lead to your website. We got to pick up the phone. We got to engage these people in conversations. We got to send them video emails for follow-up. And just do things that we've never done before. And it might be a little uncomfortable, but we got to personalize everything that we do, because that's how you're going to scale a business today. You're not going to scale it, and I'm talking about small to medium size with a lot of marketing stuff going on.
Thanks, Bill. So Chris, I'm gonna, and this goes out to everybody else, not just to Chris. So you talked about the fact that your salespeople are getting more involved in the initial process. So my follow-on question to that is, as a result of the pandemic and as a result of this change in business, have you guys redefined your ideal customer profile? And this is not just for you, Chris, but this would be for anybody else. Have you discovered that your ideal customer profile has had to be changed a little bit because of the changing in the marketplace, and therefore, how have you communicated that to your salespeople so they're talking to the right people when they get to these virtual trade shows?
The way I'm gonna answer this, and I'm gonna do it quickly because I want to hear the perspectives of the other folks here, but I think part of it is our ideal persona hasn't changed, but the reality is there are more than one type of individual influencing a sale. Typically there's more than one decision maker. You got your financial decision maker, you got your technical decision maker. I would say what this is doing is it's giving us quicker access to reach the different influence points that would influence a sale.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else want to play off of that? Because I think that's a good point.
I think the qualification process is even more important now, because what we noticed was a large increase in RFPs, or requests for quotes from customers, mainly due to the fact that I think they're a little bored at home because they don't have the day-to-day at their own facility to worry about. So they're just theorizing projects and doing what engineers do best, just trying to fix unique problems and then sending it out for bids. And typically those had to be taken very seriously. These are real projects, and you don't really ask those initial probing questions, right? Is it funded? What's the timeline? Because history proved that there was a very high probability that those projects from that specific customer would come in. And now there's a lot of these side projects and just noise that don't contribute to the bottom line. So having to go back and kind of retrain yourself to ask those questions, what's the feasibility? And, when do you think the money is going to come? When's the PO going to come? Where, some people with some, mature clients that they have good relationships with are all of a sudden spinning their wheels on things that aren't going to grow sales.
Good point. Anybody else? Because I think this whole idea of, qualification process and ideal customer becomes really important to the points that you've made. There's a lot of noise out there, and you got to weed through the noise because your opportunity cost could be off the charts if you chase down the wrong rabbit hole. Anybody else want to throw some ideas out for the people who are listening in? Okay. Taking that same thread, how have you, your company, or your customers updated their value proposition and their messaging? You talked a little bit about the qualification process, a little bit about the messaging. So have you guys, and what's your advice to organizations? Have you changed your messaging? Have you changed your value prop in this in the current environment that we're in now?
I'll take a stab at that. I think one of the things that we are living in an environment where literally every single person that we interface with is fighting the same thing, is dealing with the same issues. So I think one of the things that this has allowed us to do is probably provide a much greater level of transparency in our relationships, really on both sides of the conversation, right? So, I mean, we're having conversations with clients about topics that, pre-COVID you probably wouldn't have had. And, there's a level of intimacy you can get to with a customer through that you probably couldn't get there without obviously living through this. Everything from supply chain challenges to direct labor issues to the overall stability of your operations. And for those opportunities where you've been able to kind of leverage that, I think there's this bond that's created where you can come out of something together, ideally in a better place than where you went into. So, long answer to saying that, I think providing some greater level of transparency has gone a long way in really establishing much stronger bonds with certainly our clients and our business.
Yeah, that's interesting. That whole idea of empathy is really has really come to the forefront. Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I'll talk about the value proposition. When I'm helping my clients and we're talking about value props, I'm trying, or not trying, but we're simplifying that value prop. I want more people to understand what exactly that customer is delivering. Right? What are they delivering? Because there's a lot of people that are holding a lot of different hats these days. And I don't want a value prop that only a Scrum Master understands. I don't want a value prop that only a mechanical engineer understands. So I want to simplify that a little bit, and I want to get specific and really dial into it. And it's the old, let's do it in 10 words, but let's make it simple so everybody understands.
Thanks, Bill. Anybody else have any changes that you've made or perspectives that would be useful for the folks that are listening in?
Yeah, I can comment a little bit. So the company I work for, Beck & Coulter Life Sciences, and our parent company, Danaher, a lot of the businesses that they own operate in the medical environment. And, for the products that we sell at my company specifically, they have an opportunity to be utilized in COVID testing specifically. So it's been really interesting to navigate internally as an organization, because we have to toe the line of understanding that we have a tool that can, and at least in a small part, aid our customer base and the global health community in fighting the pandemic, while also not seeming opportunistic at, obviously what is a really big crisis, a lot of sickness and deaths and things like that. So we've had to kind of explore, very actively during, March, April, May, June, July, how our products can be used, but also, kind of balance supporting things like COVID testing versus supporting our active customer base, and also kind of, playing our part while not also seeming like we're marketing against, what is an unfortunate situation at the end of the day.
Joe, that's an interesting point. Let me ask you a follow-on question to that, and then the rest of the gang can weigh in, because obviously when you're pursuing a new customer, one of the things that you have to do is you have to create some tension, because obviously they're not with you, so you've got to create some tension so they'll think about changing. You talked about not being opportunistic, and Doug talked about empathy. So my question is, how do you balance that, not wanting to be opportunistic and wanting to be empathetic, with the fact that you do have to create this tension in the conversation you're having, specifically with prospects?
Yeah, so for us, I think it was about, there's been a lot of, existing customer bases, so the large biopharma organizations that are leading the charge on vaccine and therapeutic drug development, but also, venture capitalists and pop-up organizations who have noticed an opportunity themselves in some of this testing environment. So I think where we really focused our effort was, the word consultant gets thrown a lot around, of course, in the sales world, but we've tried to do our best to really dig in and understand the technical aspects of what's involved in some of these processes so that we can communicate that effectively and really be and have a good, Bill was just mentioning the value proposition, knowing what our value proposition is, both in the industry in general, but also with our products and how they relate against, the competition in the market and things like that. So it's a bit of, technical expertise and understanding the industry. That is what we've kind of brought to the table, or tried to bring to the table, at least, to, provide value. Sometimes we've been, commercial teaching, so to speak, some of the customers and prospects that come to us because they may not have automation expertise or lab operation expertise or anything like that. So the value sell from our perspective is, evolved over the months as we've learned more. But I think it's one of the things where, because everyone was learning at the same time, often because we were so ingrained in it, that we, were able to be coaches and provide that value proposition to our prospects from the very get-go.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Because I think this is a challenge that everybody has faced when you're pursuing new customers and you have to create that tension. How do you walk that line? So I'm curious and I'm sure the folks in the audience are curious as to how some of you guys have done it and coached your teams as well.
Sure, I'll take a stab. And piggybacking off of Joe. So historically, we were just compressors, controls, sensors, actuators, and the big markets were the quick serve restaurants, McDonald's, Chipotle's, etc., and then food retail, primarily your.
Whoops.
I think you just went on mute, Brad.
Well, I think we may have lost Brad, or maybe he went.
That's all he had to say. That was it.
I think we're drop the mic. I think we're done now. So, all right. Let's switch around a little bit and talk a little bit about.
They didn't like what I was saying.
Yeah. Sorry. You want to keep going, Brad? Sorry about that.
Yeah, real quick. And now, we've shifted that to the supply chain, because the supply chain for food is infinitely complex, and the demand for it is unprecedented. And also, with the advent of this vaccine, there's a very high probability that it's going to need to be refrigerated. And, they're already setting up for the supply chain. They know the drug's coming. They just don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And that's been a big shift the last 6 months is, how do we set up our customers for success to be able to, get this food distributed safely? And also when this vaccine comes, how do we, prep to have this massive distribution of a drug that could be having to be stored at, -60, -70 degrees. And that's unheard of for the scale of what's about to come. So that's definitely been a shift. And it's very interesting to see, how various people respond to, you just blew up their whole world. And now you got to focus on something new. And, that unexpected, all the unexpected consequences that come with it are just, the challenges that are every day for us now.
Yeah, a lot of worlds being blown up. So let's pivot a little bit because it's still around the same topic, but I'm curious if you take the other perspective, which is, you've done business with customers or you're doing business with customers. How do you make sure that you hold them accountable for the commitments that they've made? And how do you balance that with the fact of the matter that things have drastically changed? Either projects are on hold or, and sometimes it's through no control of your customer. But at the same time, if you've delivered a product or a service, you have to get paid. So help the audience understand kind of how you balance that aspect of the business, because you got to get paid for the services and the products you provide.
I can jump in pretty quickly on this one. We've been speeding up the amount of time it takes us to get to that ROI conversation, the return on investment. So it's funny because I think we've mentioned both sides of the coin. There are engineers that are out there, creating projects, creating work because there's more time to be done. There's the other group that's more business minded, more proactive, that is using this as an opportunity to address things that they know are critical to their business that they haven't done up to this point. And I think one of the biggest things is trying to filter out this category, get rid of them as quickly as possible so you don't waste time there, and get to that ROI conversation with the people that actually have real projects that your company is capable of addressing and serving.
That's a good answer. Let me ask a follow-up on that, which is, when you're acquiring a new customer, are you asking your people for a greater level of specificity in terms of what the partnership should look like, and getting those meaningful metrics early, rather than traditionally they kind of come over time? But now, are you asking your people to let's get to the heart of the matter as quick as we can?
It'll go back to one of the earlier questions I answer. It's more, I'm getting all of the right people in the right room faster. So getting to that ROI discussion, making sure you have the right stakeholders present. I'd say that's what's speeding up, because, there's no longer, it's like, hey, this person works in this office, this person's traveling. It's like, all we have to do is jump on the same Zoom call and we can have this discussion. So if someone's serious about pursuing something and they know it has benefit, and you've done your job to create that tension that gets things to move forward, it's a lot quicker to get that, what I'll call a key player meeting, going. That's what I've been seeing.
So I'm going to offer a soundbite for our audience, which courtesy of Chris, which is, get the right people in the right room faster. That seems to be a critical, and now you have the wherewithal to do it because geography is no longer part of the equation. So that's great. Anybody else want to add to what Chris just shared?
I can tie in. Doug was talking earlier about transparency and setting expectations and things like that. And I think that we've had to have some of those conversations for honestly benefit of both parties. So us as a vendor and the customer, in terms of if there's a large financial or capital outlay that's going to be made to procure some of our products, the normal, to and fro of our accounts receivable team and the credit standing and things like that of customers certainly is still something that we need to evaluate. But equally, from our perspective, with all the supply chain interruptions that are impacting businesses everywhere, that's something where we really want to understand in very excruciating detail the scope of the project and the expectations that our customer base has. Because if we're going to be providing a product, but either we don't know that they're going to be scaling and needing a ton more product, or vice versa, they don't get as many contracts that they thought they were going to get. It's something that we need to try and get as good an understanding as we can before purchases are actually made. And I think that's something where, if you're in the middle of an implementation of something, it's certainly an aspect of there's a financial obligation that the customer has made to our organization in terms of paying, but it's also, if there's an opportunity to be dynamic or nimble that, benefits both parties for an ongoing relationship, you kind of have to evaluate them as you go, because people's financial situations are really in flux a lot of the time. So it's case by case, but I think the transparency pre-sale for both the customer and us has certainly improved because of the nature of the environment right now.
Isn't that interesting that what this has forced us to do, in essence, is get back to basics? All the stuff that we learned back in Sales 101, which was, be clear, be concise, have measurable outcomes that you're achieving, and then somehow or another we've all kind of let that slip away, and now this has forced everybody to get back to basics. So, Joe, I really like that. I think that's a great point. Anybody else want to add on to what Chris and Joe have said as it relates to the customer accountability piece of the puzzle?
I guess
I think the one thing that hasn't changed is the internal relationship between the sales force and the finance team. It's the same horse trading / begging internally that sales teams have to do to get these purchase orders approved and payment terms finalized. So that really hasn't changed for the most part. I just think it may have increased in frequency.
Okay. Somebody else was going to jump in there as well.
Yeah, I will. I think, when you talk about accountability is being honest, and it's hard. And I have to have difficult conversations with owners of businesses about things that aren't happening, and that they committed to me that we're going to change and they're not changing. And so, you can't be afraid to have that honest conversation with them. Because if you don't, nothing's going to change anyway, and they'll respect you for your honesty. As long as you're doing it with dignity and showing them respect, they'll appreciate that. Then you'll become in their corner and a lifetime, hopefully, lifetime counselor to them. Good
point, Bill. There's Patrick Liccioni has written a number of different books, whether it's Getting Naked or the 5 Dysfunctions. He came out with another one, I'd like to call it kind of a novella, called Motive. And I won't go into the whole deal. If you should look it up. But basically what it talks about is you have to have the ability to have those tough conversations, internal conversations and conversations with your customers. If you can't do that, then you got a real problem. We have a few more minutes before we're going to open it up to Q&A. I think you talked about this a little bit earlier. I know Chris did, about the trade shows, but I'm curious on a more global level. Have you guys seen, or have you been coaching your sales force in how they spend their time, and have you seen shifts in how they spend their time? Are they spending more time protecting the current client base, or are they spending more time prospecting, or some combination there? So curious as I guess what I'm going to do on this one, I'm going to ask each one of you to weigh in on that one. and then we'll see where that takes us. So whoever wants to go first, or else I can be that. What do they call them when you don't volunteer somebody, you voluntold them? So somebody want to jump in, because I'm curious. I'm sure our audience is curious as to how you've asked your people to shift their activities.
Yeah, I'll, you know what, as a coach and as someone that leads multiple sales teams in the different industries, one of the things that we talked about it earlier, is getting back to the basics. So when I start with someone, I want to talk about how they're managing their day, right? And so the first thing, and it's kind of uncomfortable for a lot of people, is let's take a look at your calendar, right? So what do we have blocked out? Do we have blocked out time for prospecting every single day? Do we have time for those retention calls to be made? Do we have time to follow up with our internal staff? You know, what does that look like, and how do you budget that out during the course of the day to get back to sales 101? Especially when you have salespeople that are selling and retaining business, because not every model is a hunter farmer.
Thanks, Bill. Next, who's going to go next? Looks like Chris is ready to go. At least his.
All right, I'm ready to jump in on this. So there are a couple elements to this, and first of all, I'll echo what Bill said. The best way you can tell what someone's doing is by looking at their calendar. Look at what you've prioritized in that regard. The number one thing I've done, because you were talking about, are you doing more prospecting or are you doing more retain activities? One specific thing, going back to salespeople taking on some marketing functions, is in addition to a podcast, I run a community and community calls as well within the manufacturing industry. Back when, in late March, when it was still a novel concept to jump on a group call for a happy hour. Now I think we're all tired of virtual happy hours and would like to maybe never see them again. But we fostered weekly community calls where I was not only bringing people within my professional network in, but more importantly, new potential prospects as well as existing clients. And I've always felt referrals are, no matter how many referrals you have, it's still an underutilized medium. You can never have too many referrals. So when I can get my ideal clients, whether they're new or existing, in a room for a discussion around something that's impacting the manufacturing industry, or a demonstration around a solution that's relevant to the current situation, I can get my customers ultimately selling to one another by having them in that more communal environment.
Wouldn't that be great if that's all we had to do was get our customers talking to each other? Anybody else who wants to jump in next?
Sure, I'll jump in. I definitely think that the shift to more prospecting is absolutely crucial at this time, especially since your typical day, you do have more time on your hands. It can jump from call to call to call. So it's imperative that the sales teams take that time and really capitalize on the ability to do more prospecting where before you just didn't have the bandwidth.
That was Brad, right?
Yes, sir.
So Brad, let me ask you a follow-up question. Do you have any mechanisms in place where you're able to monitor the quality of these prospecting calls that your sales team is making? Is it dialing for dollars, or do you have some requirements that you put on them in prep for those calls?
It's a mixture of both, dependent on industries. We do utilize a very robust CRM, and we do track what we call customer touch points to see the activities of the sales team. And there's a lot of tech that goes around in the background to put metrics behind it and track efficiency. Obviously, that's been rapidly changing, and things that we were focused on, metrics that we were focused on before aren't necessarily the metrics that we're focused on now. So hopefully that answers your question.
Oh yeah, and I think that the takeaway for the audience is that it has to be purposeful prospecting. If you're just getting on the phone and saying, "Hey, you want to buy some of this?" Hang up. That's not going to cut it. All right, anybody who else hasn't weighed in on this? I want to hear what I think Joe and Doug. I'm sure you guys have some great pearls of wisdom for the audience that I'd like to hear from you on this topic.
Yeah, so I guess the way that I would answer that question is I don't remember a time, certainly in my career, that in a period of 90 to 120 days, we swung from one end of the continuum to the other. We started off the year very robust, significant year-over-year growth, and then quickly, much like a lot of people, March, April, and May, it was triage. I mean, it was all hands on deck, working with our clients. And I would say that, what provided us the most benefit was making sure we were talking to our clients about what was important to them that day. And that changed day by day. But, in March and April, we had an all hands meeting every single morning, trying to figure out, what was important to our clients that day. And then fast forward in July and August, we swung to the other end of the continuum, which was, how can we create more value? What problems is it that obviously you're being faced with that we can help solve? And, typically you come in and out of those environments, year over year, but literally in a matter of 4 months, we were in both of those. And I think the best teams, that are able to survive those do one thing that's most important, and that's keeping the customer at the center of everything that you're doing. Every conversation you're having, every inquiry you're making, as long as when we did that through those 4 months, we came out of it obviously with much stronger clients, able to pick up some pretty significant incremental business, and has proved to be kind of a really important tenet for us as we try to weather this storm.
Thanks, Doug. That's a great. So now I have another key point, which I think this is kind of, again, sales 101, but it's probably important to hear it again, which is that your customer, I don't know how to put this any other, your customer really doesn't care about you. They care about them. They care about them. And what I've seen happen, I'm sure Bill can weigh in on this, but I've seen there's been this move on the part of sellers to unfortunately start focusing on what they really do well. And the customers just don't care. So a takeaway for the audience, I think Doug said it, which is this is about your customer. This is not about you and what's important to them that day. That's a great takeaway. So I appreciate that. I guess now I'm voluntolding Joe because he's the only one who hasn't weighed in on this topic. And so I just want to get your perspective. And if you want to pass, Joe, no big deal.
No, that's okay. Popcorn answering here. So, I mean, I think all the panelists made great points. I mean, I think from my perspective, it's been really interesting to kind of see the different dynamics that my team has had to undergo, because some people have been feast and some people have been famine in the market this year. So some people have had so much of a pipeline and so many opportunities that they couldn't really breathe, and other people had their entire territories shut down and they couldn't sell to anyone. So I think, Doug was mentioning kind of the spectrums of what people spend their time on, and Bill and Chris touched on that as well. I think it's kind of dependent, in my opinion, about what you are spending time on. So if you have a really weak pipeline, or everything's kind of gone out the window with the pandemic, whether in March or so, you're probably spending 60, 70, 80% of your time prospecting. Whereas if you have a really strong funnel and pipeline, you may not be spending as much time prospecting, or it's an add-on to your continued qualification and trying to close business. So I think it's been a kind of a different story for each person on my team, depending on where they're at in their year, how their funnels look, and really what they can spend. And then it's kind of been also interesting to look at, if you did have a weak funnel, which some people did, what are the new ways that they went about trying to find new business, which has been kind of a challenge for everyone. in terms of, we're not able to walk the halls, we're not able to interact with customers in person, things like that. But yeah, I think the dynamic and shift about prospecting versus maintaining, or farming, if you will, it has really been dependent on where people are at in the year and whether they have a strong or a weak funnel.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everybody, for that. Now, one last question, and then we're going to throw it open for Q&A. And this is kind of the more personal question, which is, a lot of people in your role spend a lot of time on the road. You're out there, you're meeting with clients, you're entertaining, you're going to trade shows, and your significant others are probably freaking out when you're at home all week. So every week. So what have you done to fill that void, both physically and mentally? Because I know a lot of people get a huge rush from travel and from all that frenetic activity, despite the hassles that go with travel. So I'm curious, just on a personal level, what you've done, real quickly, what you've done to kind of keep your sanity.
Yeah, I can certainly comment briefly. So I think what you mentioned, so there's two aspects of it. There's, physical and mental health that we have to keep front of mind for, ourselves and our teams, and same thing with our customers. So I think whatever taking care of your physical and mental health means to you is things that need to, be front of mind. So I know for a lot of us, we sometimes sit on video calls for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. If decompressing to you means you have a 15-minute break, take a walk outside, go get some sunshine, I think that's important. If it's going for a run or getting a workout, I think that's important. If it's stepping away from your phone and listening to music or whatever, the things that are kind of stimulating to you that are non-work, I think are really important to make sure. It's kind of like the sharpen the saw habit from Stephen Covey from a while ago, is you want to make sure that you're taking time away from your craft to make sure that you're, having the energy and not burning out, not being on video calls all day. So I think both of them are really important, and it's just a matter of, what does taking care of your physical and mental health mean to you specifically?
Thanks, Joe. Anybody else want to weigh in on this more personal topic?
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, you really can't summarize it any better than Joe. Finding that balance, setting boundaries, making sure you're not, working all day when your office is probably just a hallway down from your bedroom and the kitchen and things like that. So setting up those routines, for me, it's still getting dressed, putting on a collared shirt every morning rather than, working in pajamas and a t-shirt and things like that. But, I've said it a couple times, so I won't jump on it long, but just kind of repurposing some of my time from those sales activities to some of those marketing activities, hosting happy hours for my customers, running manufacturing happy hours, a podcast. It's been the other thing about podcasting is it's a great way to still connect with high level people if you're doing an interview podcast. So those have been some creative yet work related ways that I've kept my sanity during these months.
Thanks, Chris. Great point. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, so I really shifted to trying to keep a rigid schedule, very repeatable, which really has never been the case. That first month, the government, their guidelines were changing, it seems, hourly. Actually, they're probably still changing hourly. And then with our organization, the messaging was very mixed. People were required to come into the office. Then overnight it's shifted to how do we mobilize, a remote workforce and getting people that are very, very good at their jobs. And this is one thing I took for granted, is working remotely for the majority of my career, and then coaching those individuals that this is their first time in, 20, 30 plus years that they're actually having to work, from the house. So that was a big aha. And then just a tip that I picked up with all the virtual meetings is Outlook actually has a option to automatically schedule meetings to end like 5 minutes early or 10 minutes early. So allowing those bathroom breaks and being able to get up and walk around. But it definitely took a lot of effort to stay relatively sane those first few months.
That is for sure. Anybody else want to weigh in on this topic before we go to Adam to see if there's any questions from the audience? But certainly I don't want to cut you off if you've got something to share. All right, Adam, questions from the audience for the panel.
Yeah, our first question comes from another executive MBA grad, Mike Belgiorno. Is he around?
I am. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. I was wondering where your glasses were earlier.
Go ahead and ask your question, Mike.
So I want to thank everybody. This is the first time I've been able to make time for one of these opportunities through UWM. So I really am enjoying this. And thank you for sharing your experiences and your expertise. Definitely helping me. New guy in sales, 20-something years in operations. It's my 6th week in sales. And I made a big leap of faith and I'm enjoying it. My question to you is this. Given the situation the last 6-7 months, have any of you or your companies partnered with another organization or company to improve either your marketing, your branding, and or your lead generation?
Well, I'll answer that because all these corporate guys are looking at themselves like, what are you talking about? Yeah, I've partnered, I've gotten my clients partnering with people. Obviously, I've partnered with people. I've decided that I have to really focus on what I do best and stay away from the things that eat up my time.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what I do best is I'm in front of the customer and I want to make sure my clients are doing what, that they do best and not sit there and worry about the technical side of things. So let's go job that stuff out. So absolutely, there's so many great ways to find partnerships for yourselves as an individual level and for your companies. The world is your market as far as that's concerned.
Thank you, Bill.
I appreciate the levity that Bill added to that because as an individual contributor sales guy, I don't have a lot of insight into what the overall company is doing in some of these areas. But I can say, just as a salesperson, I'm investing in myself a little bit more than I used to, like finding web design partners to give me more of a robust digital presence, outsourcing some of my podcast material to companies that can repurpose a long form audio piece of content in 10 different ways to improve my digital reach. So I'm certainly talking to partners, linking up with folks that can help me amplify what I'm doing. So I think even at an individual level, like Bill was saying, there are things we can be doing.
Can I add to the question, Adam?
Yes, of course.
Have you seen any benefit from these partnerships? That's the other part of the question.
Yeah, so Michael, I think it's a great question. And I'll come back to something I mentioned earlier in the fact that we are all, battling kind of the same problem. I mean, it has different variants, right, inside of businesses. But I think the one thing that it's allowed is for everybody to have some type of relativity to each other. And I can tell you personally in our business, it's allowed us to work closer with our suppliers. It's allowed us to work closer with maybe one could call them competitors, right? And find out, what's the struggle inside of their walls versus the struggle inside of our walls. And I think in times like this, just obviously the degrees of separation that exist in the world today, it has provided some insight to us of maybe how companies are doing things differently. Some common best practices when we were all trying to figure this out for the first time. And I can think of a couple instances where it actually provided us some fruitful return in terms of, additional opportunity. So in times like this and times of adversity, I think is when you really start to test that network that you have, and also have the courage to maybe reach past where you may have felt comfortable going, when we're all trying to battle the same thing together.
And Michael, I'm going to jump in with a perspective much more tactical, which is that in addition to all the stuff that everybody's doing at home, the other group of people that have ramped up their activity are the hackers. So from a technical perspective, having partnerships with people who are a lot better than you and a lot smarter than you for some of this technical stuff will protect you from things you may not have known. So for example, my website was hacked a few weeks ago, and because I have a partnership with the guy who designed it, he was able to solve the problem for me pretty quickly. It cost me a few bucks, but had I been trying to figure this stuff out on my own, it would have been a mess. So I think from a very tactical perspective, especially for the small business owner, if you don't have that expertise in-house, because the hackers are out there, and so that technical piece of the puzzle, you want to make sure you're partnering with somebody who's really good, so that if something happens, it's solved quickly.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your feedback.
So I've got another question from, believe it or not, another executive MBA student, and he asked, when working virtually, what are some strategies to be successful when dealing with a difficult customer? Are there differences in handling these situations compared to, say, face-to-face?
I can at least, I think they're kind of one and the same in some capacity. So I think what we're doing right now, being on video, is a really impactful way. I joke with some of my colleagues. I think people they pull off of yelling at you a little bit more if they're staring you in the face, and I think you get a little bit of that with being on video in calls. It makes it more of a personal connection, and I think similarly, whether in person or virtually, it's kind of assessing the facts of the situation, where you're at, what has gone wrong, and then spinning the conversation to, all right, well, we both understand that we're here and that it's not the ideal scenario. What's our path forward? What are we supposed to be working on? What do we need to do to set up next steps? Is it recurring meetings? What are the objectives that we're trying to get through? So I think those two things are important, is continue to make it a personal connection with the customer, but after a certain amount of exhaustion that they've expressed, pivot the conversation to the best of your ability to what are we doing moving forward, as opposed to belaboring the past and what may or may not have gone wrong.
I couldn't agree more with what Joe says. I think, prior to the pandemic, we were almost exclusively a teleconference company, and by adding in video capability, it's brought in as close to a human element as possible. And Joe, you're spot on. I think that, when you see people versus when it's just over the phone, there's a different level of reaction you're going to get. I think the only other thing that I would maybe add to that, and this goes for even when we're in person, but especially now, we have found that over communicating through the remedy of whatever issue you're working is probably best. I've never had a customer tell me, that we're providing too many updates. And I think if you partner that with some level of as close to in-person or virtual communication through the process, it has proven to be, I guess, the best solution we can get to given the times.
So again, all great questions, and of course the answers are fantastic. I've got an email on a question, and it was a little bit long, so I'm going to try and paraphrase it. But you guys are in sales. You guys live and die on the sale, and trying to make the sale in the early days of the pandemic, we started to see a lot of issues inside our operations pipeline inside of our supply chain. So how are you guys handling the supply chain issues, since many of people's parts or that they use inside of the manufacturing phase, or whether you're in big pharma or any of the industries, bringing in a lot of that equipment from China, and we saw the trade war that was going on with China, and we saw the bullwhip effect happening inside of our sales pipeline because of our supply chain pipeline. How have you guys been able to overcome still getting sales when we're having such a supply chain issue? I hope I paraphrased that, because this was like a 2-page email, so I hope I did it justice.
So this is I'll take a stab. I think over the last 2 years, especially for us, we looked at everything we were sourcing from China and put, mitigation plans in place if, one thing led to another and it just got to be extremely difficult. A lot of suppliers are transitioning or expanding outside of China, especially into the, Singapore, Hong Kong type areas. But we've always tried our best not to be sole sourced in China. And I think companies that took that for granted are the ones definitely suffering. But it has to be a very tricky situation. And also, hurrying up to qualify suppliers. And obviously you're not going to get the price point that you want going outside China for something that needs to be expedited, or they know they got you. So very tricky, and hopefully most have figured out that being sole sourced is really not the way to go for situations just like this.
Yeah, I think for us, certainly our business did have some of those same challenges, both for components of the instrumentation that we make, but also the recurring revenue aspect of our business and plastics manufacturing and things like that. I mean, some of them, the pandemic was obviously a surprise to everyone, and everyone was in a reactive state. And I think that, that naturally took time for us as a business to, get back on our feet and kind of understand where our shortfalls were. I think there's been, it's been touched on a number of times in our call here today, is transparency and honesty and qualification are really important. So we had instances where, like, our lead times, for instance, were dramatically shifting in both good and bad ways, where sometimes they would be much longer than we normally would communicate, and then the next day they would be shorter, and then a week later they might be longer again. And customers are making purchases with our company because they're trying to support their own operation and their own business. So if we're not transparent, and Doug mentioned over communication, that we left them out to dry a little bit if that did occur, and that's something obviously that you want to avoid. And on the for us as plastics operations that were really challenging for a while, that was what I was mentioning earlier in our call about during the qualification process, having a real detailed understanding of what the operational efficiencies and requests of our customer base are going to be. Because if we over or under forecast that stuff, our business has to react retroactively to try and pick up the pace. And that, and that comes down to, especially one of our roles as salespeople, is accurate forecasting. At my company, like many companies, we're a lean operation. So our forecast is what gets rolled up to shareholders and what also drives the operational capacity of our organization. So all that kind of stuff was really important and became laser focused because more laser focused, I should say, because of the supply chain issues that the world has seen.
Well, I appreciate all of those answers. while we're wrapping up, I do have one question, another one coming in from an email that kind of touches on ethics and how in this world of COVID, we're starting to see some corporate ethical changes going on. And really what they're touching on, I think, is price gouging or over-promising, under-delivering. Is there anything that you guys have made changes to in your sales process as it relates to ethics? And this isn't a setup question because I'm talking to salespeople about ethics. It seemed like a kind of a challenging question in the sense of, have you seen any changes in the way that you guys, whether it's through prospecting or whether it's through your communications with your customers, about either over-promising or under-delivering, or maybe because of the restrictions inside of the supply chain industry, how your ethics as a company may have had to have changed a little?
I can start us off at least. So along the supply chain lines, for the first time in my career, we've said no to a lot of people. So we've had customers approach us with really large proposals that in a normal business circumstance, we would happily have, worked on it, whether it's an RFQ or an RFP or anything like that. And after scoping the projects, we've, with the appropriate from our leadership, have had to turn down some business because it just wasn't going to be something that we could operationally support. And that was really challenging as a sales team, because salespeople want to sell. And, it was in any other sales capacity, that would be a great thing to bring a, large multi-million-dollar opportunity to the table. But we had an obligation to our customers, both this potential new client, but also our existing customers, where if we bit off more than we could chew as an organization, that we were not only going to hurt that customer, but also we would take stock and supply and potential operational impact from our existing customers who have made our company what it is, for the last 80, 85 years. So we really had to balance a lot of that. And there was a lot of, more so than I probably cared to as a salesperson, oversight to larger opportunities, because we had to get approvals from directors, multiple vice presidents at our company to make sure that we were, approaching the correct business and we're going to be able to operationally support it. So certainly there was a lot more line of sight to what we were taking on. And it boiled down from, the direct field sales team. We kind of had to take the ethical obligation of our organization very seriously. Not that we don't, obviously, in regular life, but much more so because in normal life we would never turn down a sale, and in the new circumstances there were opportunities where we had to make those tough calls.
Joe, I really like your answer on that, because you, to an extent, you kind of talk about how things changed where you had to turn down projects, but I think, and I assume I'm speaking for all of us, working for ethical companies where that was kind of ingrained, that you knew those were tough decisions you were going to have to make, but because of having that pre-COVID baseline set of ethics in place, we've been able to make decisions as salespeople that ultimately still play into that. So while it is something that, like you said, you had to turn down projects that you normally wouldn't have in the past, the reality is you had that baseline of ethics in place that allowed you to do that. And I feel like that's where I can certainly speak for myself in that regard, same type of thing, where some of the decisions we have to make are different, but it doesn't change the ethical impact of those decisions.
Again, probably not something we were all prepared for, to get questions on ethics and supply chain inside of a sales type of how to prepare companies amid this COVID pandemic. But I'll tell you what, I'm coming away with an awful lot of bullet points. I'm actually having to look at my board because I had to write them all down. I know that what we've learned is that we have to maintain all the frenetics activities that we would normally get from going on sales calls and everything with and substitute them with other activities to keep ourselves sane. We have to, during this pandemic, become much more customer centric. We have to provide purposeful prospecting and potentially creating new metrics around what these new prospecting techniques are. Back to Sales 101, we have to be clear and concise with our customers, not be opportunistic. We have to be nimble and be willing to experiment. We have to have strong empathy for what our customers are going through because it's the customer's perspective we need to maintain. We have to solidify our value propositions. And I think it was said multiple times that virtual means it's not a negative. It actually means that we can get the right people in the same room with our customers at the right time. So with all of that, I want to thank Dave Wallace, the founder of Bay Ridge Consulting, our moderator today, our panelists Brad Kyle, Joe Ruff, Doug Odell, Chris Lukey, and Bill Snow. I need another cup of coffee here. For being panelists today. I really do appreciate it. If I want to say thanks. I see our numbers over here on LinkedIn. We hit about 170 people viewing it at which is a new record for us. So I'm very happy about that. And again, thank you for your time. And in this closing, if you guys have any final comments that you'd like to add to the overall discussion. Otherwise, we will wrap it up. So thank you once again, gentlemen.
Thank
you. Great conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.